The morning of Liam's wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect, brilliant blue sky that seemed to have been ordered just for the occasion. For David, the day had started not with the sun, but hours before, in the quiet, dark stillness of a small, familiar house. He hadn't slept much, not out of worry, but out of a buzzing, electric excitement that had filled him up so completely he was surprised it didn't glow in the dark. He'd made a pot of coffee, the familiar routine calming his nerves, and sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd helped a much smaller Liam with his math homework, where they'd shared countless pizzas while watching movies, where they'd talked about big dreams and small disappointments. This house was filled with the echoes of a life built together, just the two of them, and today felt like the grandest, most beautiful finale to that part of their story. As he sipped his coffee, his mind drifted back, painting pictures in the steam rising from his mug. He remembered the overwhelming, terrifying joy of holding a newborn Liam for the first time, a tiny, perfect person he was suddenly entirely responsible for. He remembered the struggles of being a single dad, the long double shifts at the factory, coming home with aching muscles and grease under his nails, but always making time to read a bedtime story. He remembered saving every extra penny, forgoing a new car, skipping his own vacations, putting every spare bit of money into a special savings account he'd labeled simply Liam's future. It wasn't a burden. It was his purpose. Every tired muscle, every missed opportunity for himself, was a brick he was laying down to build a better path for his son. When Liam had brought Chloe home for the first time, David had been cautiously optimistic. She was pretty and lively, and she made Liam smile. David's own savings goal had found a new, specific target: a wedding. He wanted to give his son the kind of beautiful, seamless day he could look back on forever, a day without a single worry or financial stress. He'd sat Liam down, his chest swelling with pride, and told him, "You just focus on being happy, son. Let me handle the wedding. It's my gift to you." He'd dipped into that future fund, and then some, booking the elegant Evergreen Gardens venue, arranging for a caterer known for exquisite food, hiring a band he knew played all the classic love songs, and ordering a magnificent, 5-tiered cake decorated with intricate sugar flowers. He signed every check, approved every invoice with a happy heart. This was it. This was what all the hard work had been for. Now, on the day itself, he stood in front of his bedroom mirror, carefully knotting his tie. He'd bought a new suit for the occasion, a deep charcoal gray that felt both sophisticated and comfortable. He wanted to look his best, to fit in with what he imagined would be a very well-dressed crowd on Chloe's side of the family. He practiced his smile, the one he would use when he gave his speech later, the one that would tell everyone in the room just how proud he was of the man his boy had become. He slipped the carefully written speech into his inside jacket pocket, the paper crisp and important against his chest. He looked at his reflection, a man who had worked with his hands his whole life, his face etched with lines of laughter and worry, his hands calloused but clean. He saw a father, and today, that felt like the most important title in the world. The drive to the Evergreen Gardens was a quiet, peaceful journey. He allowed himself to imagine the day unfolding, seeing Liam, handsome and nervous at the altar, watching Chloe walk down the aisle, the joyful tears he would undoubtedly shed, the first dance, the toast, the cake cutting. He pictured himself laughing and dancing, celebrating not just a union, but a lifetime of love that had led to this perfect moment. He arrived at the venue, and it was even more stunning in person. White chairs were lined up in perfect rows facing a flower-covered archway. Staff in crisp uniforms buzzed around, putting final touches on everything. The air smelled of blooming flowers and delicious food. It was perfect. Everything was absolutely perfect. David's heart felt so full he thought it might burst. He took a deep breath, smoothed down his jacket, and walked inside, ready to find his son and offer his last few words of encouragement before the big moment, his soul brimming with a quiet, profound joy that this day, this gift, was finally here. The grand hall of the Evergreen Gardens was a symphony of hushed activity, a beautiful, almost unreal picture coming to its final, perfect composition. David walked through it all, his new shoes whispering on the polished marble floor. He felt a sense of awe, not just at the beauty of the place, but at the fact that he, through his own hard work and sacrifice, had provided this. It was a quiet, personal pride, a warm feeling in his chest. He saw the place cards on the tables, the delicate centerpieces, the glint of crystal glasses waiting to be filled. Every detail was a note in the song of this day, and he had conducted it all for Liam. His main mission now was to find his son. He wanted to see him, to clap a hand on his shoulder, to look him in the eye and tell him one last time how proud he was, to share a quiet, father-son moment before the whirlwind of the ceremony began. He moved through the bustling pre-wedding crowd, a sea of pastel dresses and sharp suits, offering polite smiles to people he didn't know, who were undoubtedly guests of the bride. He followed the directions of a helpful staff member, heading towards a side corridor where he was told the wedding party was preparing. The noise of the main hall faded behind him, replaced by the quiet, carpeted silence of a hallway lined with closed doors. It felt like moving backstage before a grand performance, a place of last-minute nerves and final adjustments. He could feel his own anticipation building, a happy nervousness for his boy. He was about to turn a corner when he heard their voices. It was Chloe's, clear and sharp, and another woman's, older, with a similar, cutting tone. They were just around the bend, out of sight. David paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but simply because he was about to interrupt a private conversation. A gentleman would wait a moment. He smiled to himself, thinking he would tease Liam about last-minute cold feet. But the words that reached his ears were not about cold feet. They were made of ice. Honestly, Liam, look at him, Chloe's voice was saying, not loud, but carrying a dismissive cruelty that echoed in the quiet hall. He sticks out like a sore thumb. That suit is trying too hard, and he just has this look about him. Like he doesn't know which fork to use. My family will be watching everything. David felt his smile freeze on his face. He stood perfectly still, the warm feeling in his chest turning to a cold, hard stone. He couldn't see them, but he could picture the scene perfectly. Liam, looking anxious in his tuxedo, and Chloe, fussing over the details of her perfect day. The older woman's voice, it had to be Mrs. Evergreen, chimed in, her tone dripping with a practiced snobbery. She's right, darling. It's about the overall picture. The photographs will last a lifetime. We want everything to be harmonious. He's a lovely man, I'm sure, in his own way, but he belongs out there with the other guests, not in the family photos where he'll be front and center. David's hand, which had been resting on the speech in his pocket, fell limp at his side. The crisp paper felt like a meaningless prop now. He heard Liam mumble something, a low, hesitant sound, a protest that was too weak, too quiet to stand against the two of them. Don't be difficult, Liam, Chloe said, her voice losing its fake sweetness and turning hard, final. It's simple. He's your father, and I'm sure you love him, but today is about us. My day. He'll understand. Just go tell him it's too crowded back here, and he needs to go find a seat. In fact, tell him a seat near the back would be best. We don't want him walking you down the aisle if he's going to look so uncomfortable. It will throw the whole vibe off. The cold stone in David's chest shattered, and a raw, breathtaking pain flooded in. It wasn't just the meanness of the words, though they cut deep enough. It was the casualness of it. The utter certainty that he was a problem to be managed, an eyesore to be hidden away. They weren't even arguing about it. It was a simple matter of fact to them, like moving a piece of furniture that was cluttering the room. And Liam, his brave, kind Liam, was saying nothing. His silence in that moment was a louder, more painful betrayal than any words Chloe could have uttered. David didn't wait to hear more. He couldn't. The image of his son, cowed and silent, was too much to bear. He turned on his heel, the motion stiff and mechanical. He walked back down the plush hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The beautiful symphony of the wedding had suddenly become a screeching, horrible noise. The flowers looked fake, the crystal gaudy. The gift he had poured his heart and soul into had been thrown back in his face, and they hadn't even waited for the ribbon to be off. He walked, not seeing the guests anymore, not hearing the music that had started to play softly in the main hall. He was alone in a crowded room. The father of the groom, who had just been told he was an embarrassment, his greatest pride transformed into his deepest shame in a few cruel sentences spoken around a corner. David moved through the glittering crowd of guests like a ghost, a mannequin in his own expensive suit. The cheerful buzz of conversation around him was nothing but a distant, meaningless hum, like static from a broken radio. He could see mouths moving, smiles flashing, but the sounds didn't connect to any words he could understand. His world had shrunk down to the cold, hard knot of pain sitting where his heart used to be, and the echoing, cruel sound of Chloe's voice telling him he didn't belong. Each step away from that hallway felt like walking through deep, heavy water, the pressure immense, every movement a colossal effort. He didn't know where he was going. His feet just carried him forward, away from the spectacle, away from the altar, away from the son whose silence had hurt more than any insult. He found himself pushing open a heavy side door, stumbling out into the bright, shocking sunlight of the service area behind the grand venue. The sudden warmth on his skin felt like a mockery. Here, the illusion of perfection was stripped away. He was surrounded by dumpsters, delivery trucks, and the raw, unfinished backs of buildings. The air smelled of gasoline and hot pavement, a stark contrast to the perfumed hall inside. He leaned against rough, sun-warmed brick, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The proud father of the groom was gone. In his place was just a man alone, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a devastating truth. He had given everything, his savings, his love, his pride, to create a beautiful day for a girl who saw him as a stain on her perfect picture. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful, but he angrily wiped them away with the back of his hand. This wasn't a time for sadness. The pain was so deep, so profound, that it instantly began to curdle, to transform into something else entirely, a cold, clear, and terrifying rage. It wasn't hot, shouting anger. It was a quiet, calculating fury that settled over him like a frost, freezing his grief solid and sharpening his mind to a single, razor-sharp point. They didn't want his presence? Fine. Then they wouldn't have any part of him. Not his blessing, not his smile from the back row, and certainly not his money. The thought was like a spark in the dark. The money. He had paid for it all. Every single petal on every single flower, every note the band would play, every bite of food on those gleaming plates. He had signed the contracts. His name was on the paperwork, not Liam's, not Chloe's, and certainly not the proud Mrs. Evergreen's. The wedding was a beautiful illusion, a castle built entirely on the foundation of his labor, of years of his life given freely out of love. And they had just kicked that foundation out from under themselves without even realizing it. A strange, cold calm descended upon him. The trembling in his hands stopped. The noise of the city around him faded back into a dull roar. He stood up straight, adjusting his tie, smoothing down the jacket of the suit that had been deemed trying too hard. He wasn't a discarded father anymore. In that moment, he became something else. He was the architect of this event, and he had just decided to demolish it. This wasn't about causing a scene or yelling. That would be giving them what they wanted, a messy, emotional display they could use to prove their point about him. No, this would be clean, surgical. This would be a simple matter of business. He would simply withdraw his investment from a venture that had just revealed itself to be morally bankrupt. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His thumb hovered over Liam's name. For a second, the father in him ached to call, to explain, to give his son a chance. But the memory of Liam's silence, his failure to defend him, rose up like a wall. Liam had made his choice at that moment. He had chosen peace with Chloe over loyalty to his dad. And so, with a heart that felt like a block of ice, David opened his banking app instead. He would cancel the payments. All of them. And then he would send one final message. Not an explanation, not an argument. A simple, undeniable statement of fact. He took a deep breath of the dirty city air, turned his back on the beautiful wedding venue, and began to walk with a new, grim purpose, his phone held tightly in his hand, ready to unravel the entire day with a few taps on a screen. David's footsteps were measured and deliberate as he walked away from the opulent facade of Evergreen Gardens, each step taking him further from the world of illusion and closer to the realm of cold, hard reality. The suit that had felt like a costume of shame moments ago now felt like a uniform. He was a man on a mission, his emotions packed away in a deep freeze, leaving only a clear, sharp focus. He needed a quiet place, a command center from which he could dismantle the day. A public park bench wouldn't do. This required privacy and concentration. He spotted a small, quiet coffee shop across the street, its windows fogged, a world away from the champagne flutes and string quartets. It was perfect. He pushed open the door, a little bell jingling overhead. The air inside was rich with the scent of roasted beans and baked goods, a simple, honest smell. He ordered a black coffee from a bored-looking teenager, his voice steady and calm, betraying none of the earthquake happening within him. He took a seat at a small, formica-topped table in the corner, far from the window. He placed his phone on the table beside the steaming mug, the device looking suddenly like a tool of immense power. He took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, the heat grounding him, anchoring him to this moment, to this necessary task. He opened his phone's notes, finding the meticulously organized list he'd made weeks ago. It was a catalog of his generosity. Evergreen Gardens final venue payment. Gourmet Bites Catering, balance due. String Theory Quartet, second installment. Sweet Sensations Bakery, custom cake. Each line item represented a phone call, an email exchange, a decision made with love and excitement for Liam. Now, each one was a link in a chain he was about to break. He started with the venue, the largest payment. He found the email confirmation from Mr. Evans, the owner, a man who had been courteous and professional throughout their dealings. David composed a new email, his fingers moving with a steady, unnerving precision. "Dear Mr. Evans," he typed, "due to a fundamental and irreconcilable change in circumstances, I am formally canceling all payments related to the Liam Miller and Chloe Evergreen wedding, effective immediately. The event, for which I am the sole financier, will not be proceeding as planned. Please consider all contracts void. I will be initiating a stop payment on the final check through my bank right now. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes your business. Sincerely, David Miller." He read it over once. It was clean, professional. It gave no room for argument or emotional appeal. It was a business decision. He hit send. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he opened his mobile banking app. He found the scheduled payment to Evergreen Gardens, its status still listed as pending. With a few taps, he canceled it. The amount vanished from his scheduled transactions. It was that simple. The foundation of the wedding had just been pulled. He moved down the list, methodically, relentlessly. He sent nearly identical emails to the caterer, the bandleader, the florist, and the bakery. Each time, he copied and pasted the core message, changing only the name and business. Each time, he then immediately opened his bank app and canceled the corresponding payment or initiated a stop payment on the check he'd already mailed. Tap. Send. Cancel. Tap. Send. Cancel. The rhythm was hypnotic, a quiet, digital demolition. He was uncreating the wedding. The beautiful cake, the music, the food, the flowers, each element was systematically disconnected from the money that gave it life. They became just things in a room, no longer part of a celebration, but assets awaiting repossession. Finally, he reached the last item on the list. He had one more thing to do. This one was not a business transaction. This was personal. He opened his text messages and found Liam's name. His thumb hovered over the screen. The frozen part of his heart thawed for just a second, a pang of agonizing loss shooting through him. This was his boy, the child he'd raised. He thought of all the years, all the love, all the hope that had led to this terrible, silent moment in a coffee shop. He typed a short, simple message. It contained no anger, no blame, no explanation. It was just a final, heartbreaking fact. "I love you, but I cannot support this. I am sorry. He pressed send before he could second-guess himself. Then, with a final, definitive gesture, he pressed the power button on the side of his phone until the screen went black. The deed was done. The payments were cancelled. The message was sent. He had just withdrawn his entire world from the wedding. He sat back in his chair, the silence of the coffee shop suddenly roaring in his ears, the architect of a ruin he had never wanted to build. Back inside the grand hall of Evergreen Gardens, the atmosphere had reached a peak of eager, buzzing anticipation. The guests were all seated, a sea of expectant faces turned towards the flower-strewn archway at the front. The soft, melodious tuning of the string quartet had faded, replaced by the first few, recognizable notes of the processional song. It was a hush that was full of sound, the rustle of fine fabrics, the soft whispers, the collective intake of breath as the moment everyone had been waiting for was finally here. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the promise of a perfect beginning. At the front, Liam stood, looking pale but handsome in his tuxedo, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, stealing nervous glances towards the closed double doors at the back, where Chloe would soon appear. Chloe and her mother, hidden from view, shared one last, triumphant smile. Everything was flawless. The first ripple in the perfect pond was subtle. A waiter, who had been positioning the final tray of champagne flutes on a table near the back, received a message on his small earpiece. His professionally neutral expression flickered for just a second with confusion. He looked around, then quickly and quietly began removing the very glasses he had just set down, placing them back on his tray, and hurrying towards the kitchen doors. A few guests noticed, but assumed it was a simple last-minute adjustment. Then, the head of the catering staff, a woman with a stern bun and a clipboard, appeared at the kitchen entrance. She scanned the room, her eyes narrowed, before making a beeline not for the wedding party, but for Mr. Evans, the venue owner, who was standing unobtrusively to the side, watching the proceedings with a satisfied smile. Her urgent, whispered conversation with him caused his smile to vanish instantly. The processional music swelled. The doors at the back of the hall began to open, and all eyes turned, expecting to see the bride. But instead of Chloe, it was two more members of the catering staff, wheeling the magnificent, 5-tiered wedding cake back into the room. But they weren't bringing it to its place of honor. They were wheeling it quickly and directly back towards the kitchen, the intricate sugar flowers jiggling precariously with the speed of their exit. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. What was happening? Was this some strange new tradition? Liam's face was a mask of confusion. Chloe, poised in the doorway ready to make her entrance, froze, her smile slipping into a look of utter bewilderment. Mr. Evans broke away from the caterer, his face ashen. He walked with heavy steps to the front of the room, directly into the path where the bride was supposed to walk. He held up a hand to the string quartet. The beautiful music screeched to a halt mid-note. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with shock. "Liam? Chloe?" Mr. Evans said, his voice echoing awkwardly in the vast, silent hall. He cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I am so very sorry to interrupt. There has been a significant development." He spoke in a low tone meant only for them, but in the dead quiet, his words carried to the first dozen rows. "The payment for this event has been cancelled by the financier. The contracts are void. I'm afraid the event cannot continue. The services, the catering, the music, the venue itself are no longer available." For a second, there was absolute silence as the words failed to make sense to anyone. Then, Chloe's voice, sharp and shrill, cut through the air. "What are you talking about?" "What do you mean, cancelled? My wedding is paid for. The payments have been stopped," Mr. Evans repeated, his voice firmer now, all pretense of discretion gone. "The funds have been withdrawn. By the person who provided them. The wedding is effectively cancelled." The word cancelled hung in the air, huge and impossible. And then chaos erupted. The catering staff, now acting on clear instructions, began efficiently and swiftly removing the platters of hors d'oeuvres from the guest tables. The members of the string quartet, after a moment of stunned hesitation, began packing their instruments into their cases with hurried, embarrassed movements. It was a surreal, humiliating spectacle. The beautiful dream of a wedding was being disassembled in real time, right in front of everyone. The guests began to talk, first in whispers, then in louder, shocked exclamations. Phones came out, not to take pictures of the bride, but to record the unbelievable scene unfolding. Chloe stood utterly motionless, her face a terrifying transformation from radiant bride to a mask of pure, incandescent fury and utter humiliation. Her mother, Mrs. Evergreen, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she watched her social standing crumble to dust in front of her entire world. And Liam, in the middle of it all, simply looked lost. He looked at the empty space where the cake had been, at the waiters taking away the food, at the guests starting to stand up and leave, shaking their heads in pity and confusion. And then, as the full, devastating truth of Mr. Evans's words sank in, he understood. He knew exactly who the financier was. He remembered the text message. He remembered the conversation in the hallway. He looked at Chloe's furious, entitled face, and the weight of his own silence, his own failure, came crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. The perfect wedding was over, replaced by a very public, very devastating lesson. The grand hall of Evergreen Gardens, once a temple of elegance and anticipation, had descended into a chaotic, buzzing nightmare. The air, which had shimmered with promise just minutes before, was now thick with confusion, embarrassment, and the harsh, grating sound of rolling carts as the last of the appetizer platters were unceremoniously whisked away. Guests were on their feet, not to celebrate, but to gawk and murmur, clustering in shocked little groups, their fancy clothes suddenly feeling like costumes for a play that had just been cancelled mid-performance. The main actors were left stranded on the stage, under the harsh, unforgiving lights. Liam stood at the center of it all, but he felt completely alone. The words of Mr. Evans echoed in his mind, a dreadful, repeating loop. The payment has been cancelled by the financier. He didn't need to wonder who that was. The memory of his father's face, the hurt in his eyes that Liam had seen but chosen to ignore in that terrible moment in the hallway, flashed before him. He saw it all with a devastating new clarity. He saw his dad, working late shifts, his hands rough, always putting Liam's needs first. He saw the proud, hopeful look on his face when he'd offered to pay for the entire wedding, a gift given with pure, unconditional love. And then he saw himself, in that hallway, listening to Chloe and her mother tear that good, kind man to pieces. He saw his own silence. He stood there and said nothing. He had allowed it. The shame that washed over him was so intense it felt like physical sickness, churning in his stomach and burning his face. He turned slowly to look at Chloe. The transformation was complete. The beautiful, blushing bride was gone. In her place was a stranger, her features contorted into a mask of furious, entitled outrage. She wasn't looking at him with love or shared shock. She was looking at him as if he were the one who had caused this, as if he were a servant who had failed in his one simple duty to provide her with a perfect day. "This is a disaster," she seethed, her voice a low, venomous hiss meant only for him, but carrying in the strange quiet that had fallen over their immediate vicinity. "Your father. How could he do this to me? To us? He has humiliated me in front of everyone. He has ruined everything." Her words were the final, crucial key that turned in the lock of Liam's understanding. To me. Not to us. Humiliated me. Not us. There was no we in her anger. There was only her wounded pride, her spoiled party. She didn't care about the why, about the cruelty that had provoked this nuclear response. She only cared about the result and how it reflected on her. In that moment, he saw the truth of her character, laid bare and ugly in the wreckage of the wedding she had valued more than the people in it. The last of his hesitation, the last shred of obligation he felt to the idea of her, snapped. The nervous, eager to please Liam, who had been silenced in the hallway, found his voice. It was low at first, but steady and firm, cutting through her tirade. He didn't humiliate you, Chloe, Liam said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on his tongue. You humiliated yourself. You humiliated him. Chloe's mouth dropped open in shock.
She was not used to being challenged.
How can you say that? He canceled our wedding. No, Liam said, his voice growing stronger, fueled by a rising tide of anger and regret. You canceled it. The second you told the man who raised me, who worked his whole life for me, who paid for all of this, he gestured wildly at the crumbling spectacle around them, that he was an embarrassment, that he didn't belong. You looked at the greatest act of love I've ever been given, and you called it messy. You looked at my father, and you saw a problem. He took a step back from her, from the beautiful dress that now seemed like a costume for a person who didn't exist. The illusion was shattered. He looked at her, and then at her mother, who was staring at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. If you can't respect him, Liam said, the finality clear in his tone, you don't respect me. And you don't deserve him. Or any of this. With a resolve that felt both terrifying and liberating, he reached up and pulled at the knot of his tie, loosening it, then undid the top button of his crisp white shirt. It was a small, simple action, but it was profoundly symbolic. He was taking off the uniform of this fake, performative day. He shrugged off his tailored suit jacket and let it drop, right there on the floor next to the altar. He didn't look at Chloe's horrified face again. He turned his back on the ruined wedding, on the gasps of the remaining guests, on the life he had almost chosen. He had a much more important person to find. He started walking, then faster, until he was almost running, pushing through the confused crowd, heading for the doors, heading for home, heading for his dad. The drive to his childhood home felt like the longest and shortest journey of Liam's life. The world outside the car window was a blur of color and motion, but inside, everything was moving in agonizingly slow, crystal-clear detail. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear, regret, and a desperate, aching hope. What if his dad wouldn't see him? What if the door was locked? What if the damage he had allowed to happen was too deep, too final, to ever be repaired? The image of his father's face, the quiet devastation in his eyes, haunted him. He had traded that unwavering love for the approval of people who saw kindness as a weakness. He pulled up to the familiar curb, the house looking smaller, quieter than it had just this morning. The silence felt accusing. He walked up the path, his footsteps heavy on the familiar concrete. He half expected the door to be locked, but the knob turned easily in his hand. He pushed it open and stepped into the quiet, dim living room. And there was his dad. Not the proud, suit-clad father of the groom from a few hours ago, but just Dad. He was in his old armchair, not reading, not watching television, just sitting, staring at the cold, empty fireplace. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, as if the pain of the day had physically aged him. He didn't look up as Liam entered. The silence in the room was thick and heavy, a tangible thing that pressed down on both of them. Liam stood there for a long moment, his rehearsed apologies dying in his throat. They all sounded hollow and cheap. Finally, he found his voice, and it was little more than a broken whisper.
Dad.
David slowly turned his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. The storm of his actions had passed, leaving behind a landscape of profound sadness. He didn't speak. He just looked at his son, waiting. "I'm so sorry," Liam choked out, the words finally breaking free in a rush. "I am so sorry. I was nervous and scared, and I froze. I heard what she said, and I knew it was wrong, so wrong, and I didn't say anything. I let her say those terrible things about you. The man who did everything for me." Tears were streaming down his face now, hot and shameful. "You gave her everything, and she was so mean. And I was worse because I did nothing. I failed you." David watched him, his expression unreadable for a terrifying moment. Then, a sigh escaped him, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from the very core of him. He didn't get up, but he nodded slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement, of hearing the words. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Liam," David said, his voice quiet but steady. I did it because she hurt me. And when someone shows you who they are, that clearly, that cruelly, you have to believe them. I couldn't let my love for you pay for her cruelty. I couldn't let my life's work fund that disrespect. He paused, looking at his son, really looking at him, seeing the genuine remorse. I did it to show you that actions have consequences, that how we treat people matters, down to our very core. Liam took a hesitant step forward. I know that now. I see it. I see her now. And I see what I almost lost. He swallowed hard. Can you ever forgive me? Finally, David moved. He rose from his chair, and for a heart-stopping second, Liam thought he might be asked to leave. But instead, David opened his arms. It was all the invitation Liam needed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell into his father's embrace, the hug fierce and tight, and full of a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve, but would spend the rest of his life earning. They stood there for a long time, in the quiet of the house, the wreckage of the wedding far away, the foundation of their real family firmly back in place. Later, over cups of tea at the same kitchen table where the wedding plans had begun, they talked. Really talked. The money, David explained, wasn't gone. It was just repurposed. That money was always for your future, Liam, he said. A future with someone who values you and the family you came from. Until then, maybe we use a bit of it for that fishing trip to Alaska we always talked about. Just the 2 of us. And that's exactly what they did. They chose an adventure built on love and respect, not a party built on appearances. Liam did eventually find someone new, a kind, funny woman named Sarah who shook David's calloused hand firmly and looked him right in the eye when she said it was an honor to finally meet the man who raised such a wonderful son. And at that wedding, much smaller and filled with genuine laughter, David gave his speech, his heart full and light, his son beaming at him from the head table, surrounded by people who loved them for exactly who they were. Their story, from a painful ending to a beautiful new beginning, shows us that it's never too late to choose the right path, to stand up for what matters, and to cherish the people who love you for you. It's a reminder that the truest families are built on a foundation of respect. If you've been following along with David and Liam's journey and you want to join us for more stories about life, tough choices, and the lessons we learn, make sure to subscribe to the channel. A simple click helps you never miss our next tale, and it's the best way to show your support for the stories we share. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.